Ever wondered what people dined on in medieval taverns? Get ready to be shocked and amazed as we uncover the 20 nastiest meals from that bizarre era. Stay tuned, because some of these dishes will definitely make you appreciate modern cuisine a whole lot more. Number 20. Porpoise. Back in the Middle Ages, people believed that porpoise was a fish, and so they ate porpoise soup during Lent. Apart from porpoise, this rather strange soup also consisted of almond milk, wheat, and saffron. During medieval times, people living along the coast often ate porpoises. While ordinary people may have harpooned their own, the nobility would have had fishing crews. Porpoise pudding was a treat served at medieval feasts. The process began by combining porpoise blood, porpoise grease, and oatmeal in a bowl. The chef then stirred in a dash of salt, pepper, and ginger. Carefully, the chef filled a clean porpoise stomach halfway with this savory blend before sewing it closed. To prevent it from exploding during cooking, the chef used a needle to puncture tiny holes in the stomach. The chef prepared a large pot with water and placed an overturned plate at its bottom. Then he positioned the pot over a fire. He waited until the water boiled before carefully positioning the stomach on the plate. It was left to boil for 3 to 4 hours. After removing the stomach from the water, the stomach was placed on a plate to drain thoroughly. Finally, the chef placed the stomach near the campfire, letting it crisp until the skin achieved the desired crunchiness. The time required to prepare this dish often meant it was saved for several days. Number 19. Humble pie. Back in the Middle Ages, people could not imagine a holiday celebration without a serving of humble pie. Humble pie was basically a meat pie that consisted of edible entrails of deer or wild animals. While it may not sound very appealing to us today, back in the day, it was seen as a real treat. Humble pie was a straightforward yet flavorful dish, reflecting practicality and thriftiness. This pie was popular among ordinary people. Cooks made the pie from organ meats like heart, liver, and kidneys, from game animals such as deer or boar. The chef began by boiling the offal and then chopping them into small pieces. Then they added mutton suet and mixed a handful of herbs like thyme, marjoram, borage, parsley, and rosemary. The chef would prepare a pie pastry by combining white flour, water, and oil, creating a palatable dough. After kneading the dough until smooth, the cook rolled out the dough into thin sheets. He inserted the bottom crust into a pie pan. Then the cook added the chopped boiled offal, mutton suet, and herbs. He spread the mixture out evenly over the bottom crust. Once the filling was in place, the cook added a top crust. Finally, he baked the pie until the crust turned golden brown and the filling was cooked through. This dish did not cost much to make, therefore poorer families often enjoyed it. Yet it was delicious, therefore nobility often ate it for daily meals. Number 18. Roasted peacock. Just like roast swans, roasted peacocks were also seen as a delicacy. The unlikely dish was prepared by removing the peacock's skin and feathers, which were to be reused later. The peacock was then roasted with its legs positioned as if it was still alive. Once roasted, the peacock was reclothed in its skin and feathers. Peacock flesh was supposed to last 30 days, meaning that this unique delicacy could be enjoyed for days after it was initially served. Nobility often served peacocks for Christmas dinner. The chef prepared a peacock by removing its feathers and seasoning it with spices like cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon. Next, the chef slowly roasted the bird over an open fire. After roasting, they carefully reattached the feathers to the bird's body. This process aimed to make it look like the bird was alive again. The highest-ranking woman at the feast carried the bird to the table. A boiled sauce made with liverings, black grapes, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, pepper, galangal, wine, vinegar, and sugar was served with the bird. Liverings were small slivers of meat. Often chefs used organ meat when making this sauce. Number 17. Cock Ale. While beer was popular back in these days, it wasn't nearly as pleasant as it is now. Cock ale, for example, was brewed with a chicken corpse. In the Middle Ages, cock ale was a popular type of beer, which was prepared by crushing a boiled cock, 4 pounds of raisins, nutmeg, mace, and half a pound of dates, and throwing the crushed ingredients inside a canvas bag. The bag was placed in the ale and left there to steep for 6 to 7 days. It was then bottled and kept still for a month, after which it was ready for consumption. This kind of ale was drunk not only in the early modern period, but well into the 19th century. It appears in stories, recipes, and various writings throughout the centuries, even in dictionaries. And its name was noted as being somewhat provocative, quite deliberately.
Oh, that's freaky.
Oh, man.
Helen, check this out.
Jeez.
Number 16. Frog legs. This predates the first written attestation of the French eating frogs, 12th century, by a fair few millennia. And it also renders it slightly awkward that since the 18th century, frog or frog eater have been insults the Brits have thrown at their French counterparts across the narrow channel, insults to which the French habitually responded by calling us the roast beef or les rosbifs. Indeed, frogs and frog legs used to be synonymous with the hated French and were therefore hated themselves. So much so that in the 19th century, when the French chef Auguste Coffier tried to sell frog legs to a London clientele, he resorted to trying to call them nymphs. There is one important thing to bear in mind regarding these prehistoric Britons' consumption of frog legs. Until around 5500 BC, Britain was still physically connected to mainland Europe, somewhat blurring the lines between our prehistoric ancestors' national consumption. Frog legs are still considered a delicacy exported widely in the East, especially from countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. But when it comes to creating national stereotypes, they are at their most powerful in France. Number 15. Garbage. Yay! Garbage did not sound very appealing, and indeed it wasn't. Made from chickens' heads, feet, livers, and gizzards, which were stewed in broth, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, mace, parsley, and sage, bread. It was served with ginger, verjuice, salt, and saffron.
Look at that! Like Voldemort's hand. Actually tasted all right. Those gizzards, nice and soft.
Many people had flocks of chicken. When they stopped laying eggs, then they were slaughtered. Therefore, chicken head soup was popular. Cooks would prepare chicken head stew, fondly known as garbage, over an open fire in large cauldrons suspended by iron hooks. First, the cook would gather fresh vegetables like turnips, carrots, kale, and cabbage. They would also pick herbs like thyme and rosemary. The cook would then heat rendered fat or oil in the cauldron over the fire. Meanwhile, they would chop the vegetables and herbs. They put them in the pot and let them get soft. Next, they would add the chicken heads and some water to the pot to simmer for several hours. Finally, they would season the stew with aromatic spices like black pepper and cloves, adjusting the flavors to taste. Number 14. Viper's Soup. The answer, unsurprisingly, lies with Britain's empire. Viper soup seemed to have come from China, where snakeskin was revered for its remedial benefits. A snake's natural flexibility was thought to offset our stiff, arthritic joints. Its regular shedding of skin was thought to serve dermatological purposes, and its strong venom was believed to inject a spot of that manly vigor so important to Georgian culture. This explains why various viper soups or broths were recommended to cure or at least alleviate the symptoms of a number of ailments, and the predominant belief of the age that an animal's sudden and violent death added to the potency of its healing powers goes some way in explaining the palatable violence of Miss Mason's recipe and why the vipers had to be alive in the first place.
A snake dinner may not be for the squeamish, but the public preparation ritual has been great for business.
Number 13. Singing chicken. Forget swans and peacocks that look as if they were alive. The singing chicken was so much more impressive. It was also not uncommon to have a swan, pig, or fish breathe fire, an impressive feat that was achieved by soaking cotton in alcohol and then lighting it inside the animal. Roasting poultry was an intricate process. First, the cooks suspended the bird on a spit. Then, they slowly rotated it over an open flame. Alternatively, they cooked it on a hearth. Cooks paid meticulous attention to ensure it cooked uniformly. They frequently applied drippings or other seasonings to enhance the flavor. This also helped to keep the meat moist. The cooking duration varied depending on the bird's size and type. After roasting the bird to succulent perfection, the chef would let it cool briefly. Then, he would insert a mercury and ground sulfur mixture into the bird's cavity. The heat from the roasted bird warmed the stuffing mixture. Therefore, a chemical reaction would occur. The reaction sounded like a hissing sound, creating the illusion of the bird singing. Despite the singing chicken's entertaining nature, it was strictly intended for display. Overeating it could poison a person. Therefore, the waitstaff usually showed the bird quickly. They then removed it and put other food out for the meal. Number 12. Surströmming. This Swedish delicacy involves fermenting herring for several months until it becomes a putrid, foul-smelling fish. It was not limited to medieval times, but is still consumed today. Fermented Baltic herring parties. Surströmmingsskiven are mostly celebrated in the north and around the same time of the crayfish parties, late summer into fall.
So up until we invented refrigeration, peoples around the world have used a very simple chemical to prevent foods from spoiling.
One 18th century merchant wrote home complaining that on these journeys it was necessary to abstain from kissing the otherwise attractive local women on account of the smell of sour fish that enveloped them. He didn't realize the odor was simply a byproduct of one of Sweden's oldest culinary traditions, fermented fish. The fermented herring is an exotic delicacy, presumably only a native Swede and perhaps only a Norrlänning or Northerner can fully appreciate. Each August, there is a rush to buy the year's harvest of surströmming. Number 11. Beaver. During the Middle Ages, it was believed that beaver tails were cold and thus could be eaten on fast days. In the 17th century, it was no longer just the tail that was allowed on fast days, but the whole beaver itself. Apparently, when the Bishop of Quebec asked his superiors whether his parish could eat beavers on Fridays during Lent, the church declared that indeed they could, for the beaver was a fish due to the fact that it was an excellent swimmer. People saw eating beaver as a special treat. They mainly ate them during important gatherings and celebrations. Part of the challenge was convincing the beavers to go into wooden traps. If that was unsuccessful, they had to try to hunt them with dogs. Then cooks could prepare beaver meat in various ways to extract its robust, gamey flavor. Often, chefs prepared the whole beaver with foraged herbs. Then, they added seasonal fruit to the serving platter before placing it on the table. One method for preparing beaver tails involved boiling them in water and wine. Then, they roasted the tails on a spit. Chefs served the roasted tails with a dripping sauce made from vinegar, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and salt.
They're just chipping.
Other times, chefs skinned the beaver before boiling it in a saltwater mixture, sprinkling it with sugar right before serving it. Dining on beaver meat was so popular that it remained so into the 17th century when bishops permitted Catholics to consume beaver. They deemed it fish-like and thus acceptable according to religious dietary laws to eat on fasting days. As a result, beaver tails became a popular dish Catholics ate during this time, and its popularity spread. Number 10. Roasted swan. In 14th century England, roasted swan was a real delicacy. There were two ways of preparing it, with the first being to mince the boiled swan's entrails with bread, ginger and blood and season it with vinegar. In the second method, you could cut the bird wide open, take off its skin, and roast it on a spit. If the latter recipe was followed after the bird was roasted, it was reclothed in both its skin and its feathers before it was served to the amused and undoubtedly pleased guests. People considered swans royal property, but that did not save them from dinner tables. Most people had no access to swans. Instead, they were raised on lakes on noblemen's estates. The exact preparation method varied across different regions. Often, chefs cleaned the swan and washed its entrails. Then, they boiled it in salt water, minced the meat, and put it in a bowl. Ginger, galing ale, and cinnamon were added to the minced meat. Occasionally, chefs added grated bread and broth to the minced meat. This created a flavorful stuffing. Sometimes cooks added burnt breadcrumbs or a small amount of blood for color and richness before roasting. Finally, the chef reattached its skin and feathers. The food diaries of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I reported that they were served this food at their feast. The finished bird reportedly tastes like dark meat and had a mild, clean taste. Number 9. Calf's Foot Jelly. A gelatinous dessert made by boiling and then chilling the feet of a calf. The resulting jelly was often flavored with spices and served as a delicacy. Setting unsalted meat in jelly was probably seen as a way of extending the opportunity for eating fresh meat, which may have been seen by some as superior to salted meats. Moreover, this particular jelly dish is about the enjoyment of elite meat. So, why do I say this? Well, the first ingredient is piglet, porcel, in Anglo-Norman. Today we would call this suckling pig, such as the animal is slaughtered before it has reached the age of weaning, and it is considered both a delicacy and a luxury. It was no different in medieval England, where it was eaten both roasted and poached. The succulence of the meat is what made it a delicacy. Its status as a luxury comes from the obvious fact that an early season piglet wasn't going to bring anywhere as much meat as a fattened, older porker slaughtered in the autumn, which would then be salted to provide meat across the winter period and beyond. Pertinently, a 13th century record from Rochester Priory notes that, instead of one pig, 2 or 3 suckling pigs might on occasion be slaughtered for the court, the brethren, underscoring its status as a special treat. Another curious thing about the first recipe is that the jelly making process is not described in any real detail. We're not given the method other than that portions of the pig and hens are cooked in wine. So there is no mention that the subsequent broth, in which the meat is served, must be strained and then cooled in order for the jelly to form. Indeed, the translators decided to add the information "when gelled" in square brackets in order for the dish to make proper sense. Apart from imparting flavor to excite the palate, expensive spices from faraway lands were undoubtedly also used to signify the wealth and status of the household. As a consequence, then, our medieval jelly was far removed from the sphere of peasant fare, and hence from the humble roots with which we might associate some of its more modern analogues. Number 8. Helmeted cock. A variation of the cockentrice, the helmeted cock was prepared by mounting a bird adorned with coats of arms that honor the noble lords and ladies present on a pig. Unlike cockentrice, however, it was seen as merely a side dish to be served in between main dishes. If you were a poor person in the Middle Ages, food for the most part was dull, boring, and repetitive. However, for the rich, nothing was off limits, as explained in Terence Scully's book, The Art of Cookery in the Middle Ages. They enjoyed dining on swans and, to keep them going through Lent, beaver tail. However, they were munching their way through so many animals they were forced to create new and more bizarre ones. A favorite of the table was the helmeted cock, prepared by stitching a rooster so it was seemed to be riding atop a pig. Anyway, while we're still in the Middle Ages, we should spare a moment's thought for the helmeted cock, a military outfitted equivalent to a baby monkey riding on a pig. Both were designed to entertain, neither needed to happen. The idea behind the helmeted cock is that the pig represented the noble steed, while the cock, resplendent in military regalia, stands in for the gallant knight-errant. Guaranteed to get a good laugh at banquets, it was served up as a companion to the cockatrice. But unlike more famous counterpart, the helmeted cock only appears in one medieval manuscript, a cookbook by the name of Les Viandières de Taverns by Guillaume Terrell. Guillaume Terrell describes the method for preparing the helmeted cock thusly. First, after roasting both pig and poultry, stuff the latter without skinning it and glaze it with egg batter. Second, sit the bird astride the pig and equip it with a glued paper helmet and a lance balanced on its breast. Finally, to add the finishing touches and put the royalty in the royal meat, or royal meat as it was known then, cover the lance with colored leaf to signify the bird comes from noble stock, gold or silver leaf, should the cock symbolize a lord, otherwise white, red, or green tint. Number 7. Cockatrice. There's no denying that medieval chefs were extremely innovative. They not only prepared scrumptious dishes from real-life beasts, but also created their very own unique creatures that did not even exist. This creature was known as cockatrice and was prepared by boiling a rooster, cutting it in half and sewing it to the bottom of a pig. The whole thing was then stuffed, roasted, and covered in egg yolks and saffron before being served to the very lucky dinner guest. Cockatrice was a whimsical creation created in medieval kitchens. This culinary feast began by scalding and cleaning a capon and a pig, then cutting them in half. Next, the cook sewed the two animal halves together. Therefore, each one consisted of half of each animal. Then the cook created a mixture of beaten eggs, sheep suet, saffron, salt, ginger, and grated bread. They stuffed the mixture into the animals before roasting them on a spit over a fire. Chefs added the finishing touch by creating a gilded coating of egg yolk, ginger and saffron, and parsley or mellowed juice to brush over the roasted animal. The cost of this dish would have been too much for many families. Therefore, chefs reserved it for nobility. They usually prepared this when their supervisor wanted to impress guests. Number 6. Lampreys. Lampreys is certainly one of the more hideous fish out there. It not only has a sucked cup-like face, but also sucks the blood of other, larger fish. But while you may be grossed out, medieval people certainly weren't. Indeed, back in the Middle Ages, lamprey was considered a delicacy and was most often eaten on meatless days. It is said that King Henry I of England ate lamprey so often that his death was, in fact, the result of him overindulging in the strange fish. Lampreys are fish resembling eels with round mouths full of teeth. Anglers often caught them in rivers and estuaries for their tasty meat. To prepare them, cooks would remove their blood through their mouth. Then they would cut out the tongue and scrape the inside of their mouths. Then the fish were scalded before being roasted on a thin spit. While cooking, chefs prepared a sauce containing ginger, cinnamon, cloves, grains of paradise, nutmegs, and burnt toast crumbs. They brought the sauce to a boil. Sometimes they would add blood, vinegar, or wine to it. In some cases, chefs added the lampreys to the sauce before serving it. Other times, they served the sauce in a bowl beside the lampreys. Another popular way to serve this fish was in a pie. To make lamprey pie, cooks would line the pan with pie crust. The filling consisted of roasted lamprey, butter, shallots, and bay leaves. Families often gathered around the pie, where each person would get a slice to enjoy. Number 5. Eel pie. People of all statuses ate eel pie during medieval times. Some people received their pay in eels, making this dish very accessible. A chef would begin by preparing a pie pastry, reserving half of it for the top crust. Then, they would place the other part in the bottom of a pan. Next, the drained eels were cut into small pieces. The chef would create a mixture of almond milk, spinach, raisins, onion, parsley, salt, pepper, ginger, and mace. They would then pour some of the filling over the pastry in the dish before adding a layer of eel pieces. He would repeat the process until there was no more filling or eels. Finally, cover the pie with the pastry crust, seal the edges, and make a few slits on top to allow steam to escape during baking. Number 4. Souse. Souse, also known as soused or pickled meat, was a popular medieval dish that involved the preservation of meat through pickling. It was commonly made using various types of meat such as pork, beef, or fish. The process of making souse involved simmering the meat in a flavorful liquid, typically consisting of vinegar, water, and spices. Immersing the cooked meat in a liquid solution of salt brine was a fairly common practice in medieval Europe. In fact, although the term pickle didn't come into use in English until the late Middle Ages, the practice of pickling goes back to ancient times. Not only would this method preserve fresh food for months so that it could be eaten out of season, but it could infuse it with strong, piquant flavors. The simplest pickling was done with water, salt, and an herb or two, but a variety of spices and herbs, as well as the use of vinegar, verjuice, or, after the 12th century, lemon, led to a range of pickling flavors. Pickling might require boiling the foods in a salt mixture, but it could also be done by simply leaving the food items in an open pot, tub, or vat of salt brine with the desired flavorings for hours and sometimes days. Once the food had been thoroughly infused by the pickling solution, it was placed in a jar, crock, or another airtight container, sometimes with a fresh brine, but often in the juice in which it had marinated. Number 3. Pigeon pie. Pigeons were a common food source during the medieval period and often used in pies, with the entire bird being baked inside the crust. Eating pigeons has been recorded in history since the Middle Ages. In fact, it was of quite a high regard in Spain, as pigeons were a favorite meal of King Juan I of Castile. The first recorded recipe of pigeon pie was in a recipe book by the royal chef of Philip III in 1611. Even earlier, it was recorded in English cookery books, and as far as I can tell from the ingredients in the pie, it is a rather English-style type of meal. By the mid to late 19th century, pigeon pies had rather gone out of fashion. It was a common meal for most people, though soon the filling was replaced by other meats and pigeons were no longer used for commercial meat sales. By the mid-20th century, cookbooks no longer made mention of pigeon pie, therefore rendering it extinct in American culinary practices. Number 2. Roast hedgehog. Hedgehogs may seem like an unlikely source of nourishment for us today, not least because of their prickly spines. Yet their quills didn't deter determined medieval chefs who prepared roasted hedgehogs by cutting their throat open, gutting them, and then trussing them like pullets. The hedgehogs were then roasted, but only after they were pressed in a towel to dry and served with cameline sauce or wrapped in pastry. A piece of advice: if you're trying to roast a hedgehog and it refuses to unroll, simply put it in hot water. Or at least that's what the recipe book says. People used traps to catch hedgehogs or caught them by hand during medieval times. After capturing the hedgehog, its throat was slit. Then the hair was singed off the animal by carefully holding it over a flame until the fur began to char. Next, the chef gently scraped the hedgehog's body to remove the charred fur, revealing the skin. Then the chef removed the entrails and the cook rinsed the body cavity clean. After cleaning, the hedgehog was wrapped in long grass, an insulator and flavor enhancer. The chef laid the prepared hedgehog on a bed of long grass and covered it with more grass. Then they placed a large pot filled with water over a campfire to create gentle, simmering heat. The hedgehog was put on the fire's edge, allowing it to cook slowly and evenly. After simmering for several hours, the chef removed the hedgehog from the fire and removed the grass to reveal the succulent, tender meat. Often, the chef reused the water to make a nettle sauce to serve alongside the meat. Preparing hedgehogs was very time-consuming. Commoners often reserved them for special occasions. Number 1. Roasted cat. Ever wonder how to roast a cat? People saw cats as symbols of mystery and things beyond ordinary understanding. According to one medieval recipe, you start off by cutting off its head and throwing it away, because it is not for eating, for they say that eating the brains will cause him who eats them to lose his senses and judgment and act strangely. Then you cut the cat open and clean it. At this stage, the feline may look ready to be roasted, but alas, you must first bury it in the ground for a day and a night before you do so. After wrapping it in a clean cloth, they bury it in the ground for 24 hours. After digging it back up, the cook would rub the cat's body with a grease and garlic mixture. Next, they would beat the body with a green twig and insert a long rod through the cat. They would position the rod over a campfire and turn it slowly until the meat cooked. Then the chef carved it before serving it on laborers' dinner plates. You can serve the roasted cat by soaking it in broth and garlic. People with leprosy often ate ground cat. Doctors believed that it would cure them, but there is no scientific evidence to support this thinking. And there you have it, folks, 20 of the craziest medieval meals that may make you grateful for today's dining options. If you enjoyed this journey into culinary history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out our other videos for more fascinating insights. Thanks for watching.